Welcome to this presentation. This is a collaboration between the Patent Free Library and the Camden Conference. And you can see we've got Camden Conference people virtually and in person. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to turn it over now to Pam Barry of the Camden Conference. Pam, it's all you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pam Barry, and I'm a member of the Southern Maine Camden Conference Initiative. On behalf of the Camden Conference, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon and evening's event. And it's leading up to the annual Camden Conference, which is titled India, Rising Ambitions, Challenges at Home. This conference will be produced live in Camden, February 16th to the 18th at the Opera House in Camden. David Brancaccio, host of NPR's Marketplace, will be the moderator. There are also live streaming venues on the big screen in Portland at USM and in Rockland at Strand Theater. The conference will explore India's growing role as a world power and what this could mean for us here in Maine, the United States, and rest of the world. I would urge you to visit the camdenconference.org for details on the conference. This time, I'd love to thank the Patton Memorial Library and Hannah Lackoff for their work in putting this together. It is going to be a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful event. The Prince Memorial Library is a special library for me because I grew up in Bath, and that library was just always welcoming, had everything I ever needed. So again, I'd like to thank the library. I'd like to thank Hannah for her hard work and for our guest speakers. Have a good afternoon.
welcome, friends of the Patent Library and those of us online. I'm Kathleen Sutherland, and I've been very interested in the whole subject of India. My background is more in the Middle East, but I would like, I have explored India, and I've also been to India and to Nepal. And what impressed me and others is the tremendous variety and richness of India's culture and history. As you know, it's probably it surpasses China now, actually, in population, and it really has a long history compared, in addition to China's. One of the examples and illustrations of India is its rich heritage of food, which comes from many historical influences and geographical impact. We are very fortunate to have this afternoon my friend Sandra Garson, who has also has a rich background in visiting the areas, and particularly she's been involved in Nepal, and she and I have been sharing lunches together recently in Brunswick, which has two Indian cuisine restaurants. And then, of course, there are several Indian restaurants in Portland and the Portland area. So what we would like to do is to introduce you to the richness of Indian cooking, which really epitomizes the richness of the culture and India. And we also, at the conclusion, we have some Indian specialties, food specialties to taste. Unfortunately, those of us on Zoom will not be able to enjoy them, but I would recommend that you patronize some of the restaurants, particularly Sherry Punjab in Brunswick, which has provided these goodies. And yesterday I visited, actually for the first time, one of the up and coming restaurants in South Portland called Taj. I had a light lunch there and was able to talk with the staff there on the menu, which I think I shared with Hannah and Sandra. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sandy Garson, who will inform us of the geographical and historical influences on Indian cooking.
Sandy Garson, former caterer, food entrepreneur, and food historian, has published many articles and 2 cookbooks, one award-winning. After an orthopedic emergency made her close her successful Maine bakery and catering business, she helped establish a restaurant in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, taught cooking in Kathmandu, Nepal, cooked at a Buddhist monastery in Vancouver, Canada, lectured at New York's Rubin Museum, and was a panelist for MoFad. As Nana Chef, she taught American children to cook. Lately, she teaches Maine seniors how food is the secret ingredient of history.
That's my favorite subject, teaching people how those seemingly innocuous groceries in your kitchen cabinet really caused all the world history you had to study in college. And so when I talk about the Indian kitchen, it's going to have that slant to it. It's not going to be recipe reviews here. Because I really learned early on studying international relations and getting out in the world that the entire history of humankind, you find if you look at it, is held together by one thread, that is food. And why? Because everybody everywhere, no matter where they are, has to eat. And so everybody brings something to the table. To eat is to be alive. And as you know, it can be more than that because we also get our lips on something safe and delicious. To eat is to have delight. And we like it and we trust it. And if we have delight, we want more of it. So we seek encores. And what you might not know is that as humans, we will even fight and kill in that pursuit. You just think about the banana republics, the Opium War, which we'll talk about, or the whole slave trade, which was set up to grow sugar and keep your food sweet. In some of the latest news, the craze for palm oil is causing murder and political chaos in Honduras. And just yesterday in The Guardian, we had this incredible headline that 2 families in Delhi are fighting over who owns the right to say they own butter chicken. And they invented it. And I will leave this article on the table for you to read it. But one of them came from what is now Pakistan and the other didn't, and they're fighting over who can claim it. At the same time, India and Pakistan are fighting over who can claim basmati rice as theirs. And at one time, they were all the same subcontinental country. So people take food very seriously, and food fights are a real part of history. And so is geography, where the food is located. Some places have it all, and others have very little, and they're obliged to go get it from somewhere else. We in Maine ship lobsters to Saudi Arabia and to California, and we get shipped quinoa, which only grows in the high mountains of Bolivia. In February, we get tomatoes and melons being shipped in. In Bhutan, I met a man whose whole business was driving apples to Bangladesh, which is too hot to grow them. The Food Network is enormous and it is nonstop and it is as old as time. There are traces of it, millennia of foods being carried, foods that are 3,000 miles from where they originated. India's place in it as a land of plenty has not been as an importer so much as an exporter of food to people who don't have enough. All that basmati rice, the ginger, the coconuts, tamarind, and onions. It is now a major exporter of peanuts, which originated in South America, and chickpeas, which originated in Mesopotamia. So you could see that food moves around. Sometimes a really tasty dish discovered far from home, you all know this, is not a problem to recreate in your kitchen. The ingredients are at your local market. But sometimes you can't make that dish because the original ingredients just aren't there and Amazon can't help you. So before Google and Amazon Prime, humans in motion, like those on the Silk Road and those fishing on the Arabian and Bengal Seas, tried to make their favorite food available by carrying it back home, which I call the original takeout. That's the story of the spice routes, the wheat that Spanish missionaries brought to the Americas because they had to make communion wafers, and now we have wheat. It's the story of miso and all the tea in China. Fortune shone when transported foods like wheat, soybeans, tomatoes could be adapted to your local landscape. It is what North American natives did with South American Peruvian potatoes, and look at us in Maine. Potato comes from Peru and it's a Maine potato. But life wasn't always so beneficent. Desired food that could not be easily carried away and transplanted had to be wrested from those who had it by the conquest of their land. Getting Spanish olive oil begat the Roman Empire. To feed its people, the Greek Empire had to extend to the fertile soils of Sicily and Tunisia. Our own American empire began with that fuss over bananas. The Dutch committed genocide for nutmeg. The British committed genocide to get the codfish right here on our shores, which is the true founding story of our country. Hitler invaded Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Northern Europe for what he called Lebensraum, or living space, by which he meant wheat, dairy, and other food for the German people who didn't have enough. Also then contributing to history is human habit, or what we like to think of as stability. People grow very attached, accustomed to eating certain foods, you all know that, or dishes that you like, especially if they're connected to your childhood. Often, because we are what we are, those foods become entwined with our own identity. And now we have cheeseheads in Beantown and Jewish deli and French fries and Brussels sprouts. And I understand Los Angeles is now officially Taco Town. This is why there is always this fight over whether basmati rice is Indian or it's Pakistani, why France sued to not let California call its sparkly wine champagne, can only come from Champagne, which is a part of France. It is why UNESCO is protecting Tunisian harissa from other hot sauces, and why we are bickering in New England with Manhattan over clam chowder. It is why Hitler dictated that Germans could only eat German food or they went to jail. That was cabbage, potatoes, and pork. And if you ate English roast beef, you got arrested for being anti-German. So what happens to this habit and stability when humans change cultures, when they have to move, emigrate, immigrate? We are all so afraid of unfamiliar food. That is a primal fear. It could be poisonous, that wherever we go, we feel compelled to take or seek out our favorite eats. I actually helped a Nepali woman migrate to this country, and she would not leave without a suitcase full of food. I kept telling her she could buy everything here, and she was terrified to leave these items that she knew behind. And so we had to sneak her through the customs in San Francisco. People will bring their own food with them. And this is why Fanny Farmer felt compelled to write her cookbook in Boston at the end of the 19th century. It was to get all those new immigrants in Boston to stop eating like they were back in Europe and start eating like they were Americans. So to keep their own food, many immigrants open restaurants that serve it. You know that. It is why you find Chinese restaurants in every corner of this earth. Chinese will not eat non-Chinese food. And it is why there are Indian kitchens along both coasts of Africa. I asked a Zambian immigrant in Portland that I've been helping when I met him, I said, what is the food of your homeland? And he said, Indian with some British. And so you can tell who's moved here by just looking at what the restaurants are in Portland. And the Indian cookbook writer, Madhur Jaffrey, who was the Julia Child for us of Indian cooking, actually tried to trace the Indian diaspora in what she called the curry trail, everywhere where you find homes eating curry. And this is the inset of her cookbook called The Curry Trail of the Indian diaspora, where they took their food with them. And it is why we also have it in Maine, and I will explain a little bit about how tricky that is. So immigrants will also cannily adapt their native food to the prevailing local habits. So you will come into their restaurant. And this explains chicken, get ready for it, chicken tikka masala. I'm sure many of you have eaten chicken tikka masala. Robin Cook, when he was the Foreign Secretary of Great Britain, called this very close relative of butter chicken the, quote, true British national dish, not only because it is the most popular, but because it is a perfect illustration of the way Britain absorbs and adapts external influences. So chicken tikka is actually an Indian dish, but the masala sauce was added when the Indians realized British people had gravy on everything. So chicken tikka masala is gravy chicken tikka made for the Brits, and it is not really an Indian dish, but I bet you it's on every Indian menu you have ever seen. The story is the same for mulligatawny soup. The name combines the two Tamil words for black pepper and water, because originally mulligatawny was just this flavored broth that fed the poor of Sri Lanka and Indians deep south. And you could see Sri Lanka is the teardrop at the bottom there on the East Coast, and the whole South and Sri Lanka are related in terms of their food and their origins. But the British in the Raj, they found this broth very delightful, but they told their cooks they were used to having real soup in their bowl, something beside water. And so the accommodating Indian cooks bulked up this peppery broth with chicken and vegetables. And the resulting dish is now described as mulligatawny soup Anglo-Indian. Adaptions like this, don't laugh, have also given us American chop suey, General Tso's chicken, about which there's a whole movie on the search for the real General Tso who never existed, and Italian spaghetti with meatballs. Italians came to this country and realized that Americans had to have huge slabs of meat on their plate, so they put the meatballs with the spaghetti, which they would never do in Italy. And that brings us to the question of what's really authentic in anybody's kitchen. And what can authentic mean when in the remains of a ceramic urn in a house on the banks of the Euphrates River that burned to the ground in 1721 BC, archaeologists found cloves, which are only native to atolls in the South Pacific. Maybe you think that popular samosa, that fried triangular stuffed stack, is distinctly Indian because it's everywhere on the subcontinent and we've all heard of it and you've probably eaten it in an Indian restaurant right here. But that samosa replicates the Iraqi sambusa or sambusek, crunchy fried pastry stuffed with either a spicy ground meat mixture or vegetarian peas and potatoes. You can get them out on Forest Avenue at Dina's Iraqi Takeout. And we're going to look at how history, when the Mughals came over the Khyber Pass and brought their food, the Indians took to it. And that's where the sambusak and the samosa and a lot of these things come together. So when we talk about the Indian kitchen, we have to include the history, geography, and human wanderlust that is the recipe for what comes out of it. We have to refer, of course, to the original geographical Indian subcontinent, because it was only sliced up less than 100 years ago, so Muslims and Hindus could self-sort. So we put up the map to show you the whole shebang. What we call Pakistan was part of that subcontinent, as was what we call Bangladesh in the Great Ganges Delta. Both became Muslim-dominant countries, while what was left of India remained Hindu. And you can see that determination to be Hindu being enforced now with a vengeance against the remaining Muslims who, not unimportantly, and we'll look at that in a minute, have different food habits. And the Indians are making them very aware of that. Thanks to the British, before partition, India had also absorbed formerly Himalayan land that belonged to Bhutan. If you see up by Sikkim, there's a white on the other side, that's Bhutan. Tibetan Buddhists, Darjeeling and Kalimpong were ceded, and that's on the other side of Sikkim. And after partition, India annexed their hilly but lush neighbor Sikkim, home of cardamom and the famous Queen Hope Cook. These areas whose kitchens are Tibetan or Lepcha or Nepali are now called West Bengal, Bengal being the area below around Calcutta, and it was part of Bangladesh. India also forcefully absorbed the high-altitude Tibetan area known as Ladakh, which is very Tibetan, and there is still the disputed Kashmir in the far north. And in both of these realms, you have very different foods growing, including walnuts, and they show up in a lot of local chutneys and sweets, which you don't see anywhere else in India. Then there is all that coastline. India borders on the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal and what we call the Indian Ocean. All that coastline means a lot of salt. And that brings us to how food really creates history, which is my favorite thing. The human body requires salt to function. You all know that. People have known this for millennia. And those who live near the sea and eat seafood can ingest it that way. And those who eat wild game mammals, as the Native Americans did, they also need salt, the wild game mammals, and they get it from what we call salt licks. And if you eat the wild game mammals, then you do get some salt, no problem. If you're a vegetarian, you have a problem. And a good deal of India, for many reasons we'll go into, is vegetarian. So the Indian kitchen needs a lot of salt. And all that seacoast traditionally provided all the salt Indians need until the Brits came. As you may know, for public health benefits, the government of almost every country today makes sure that all salt within its borders is sold containing iodine. That's the key nutrient for all of us. So you see iodized salt in your supermarket. I bring this up because the marriage of government and salt goes way back in time. We know way back to the BCs, Countries like China and Egypt monopolized salt for the purpose of giving it a standard price and wide distribution to everybody. It was the first ingredient or tool of what we call regulation. This control of a life necessity also made salt likely the first iteration of another government concept, what we call taxation. The Romans taxed salt, so eventually the Ottomans taxed salt, and the French kings used the same salt to collect a flat tax for themselves, which was one cause of the French Revolution. Britain was the first country to abolish this devastating, detested salt tax, but they only abolished it in England. The salt tax was alive and well in the Raj. When the British attempt to monopolize all the harvested salt in India failed, they turned to taxing it at such a high price the Indians couldn't keep it. That still didn't achieve their goal, so the profit-hungry British forbid any harvesting of what was locally available along these long coastlines, and they forced Indians to buy their industrialized Cheshire salt. The Brits made salt harvesting and salt drying a serious punishable crime in India. So it should not be surprising that in 1930, a man named Mahatma Gandhi began his nonviolent revolution against the Raj by personally going to the sea to harvest some salt for his vegetarian dinner, setting off a chain reaction of very salty events that led to 17 years later, the British departure and the full independence of India, the creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh as separate nations. So that's from the vegetarians' need for salt. So back to the sea. To the west on the Arabian Sea is Pakistan in what was now formerly Baluchistan. Actually, you can't see it, but it's the end of that green sticking out on the left of the map, borders on Iran, historically known as Persia. Also from here, it is a quick boat trip across the sea to the Oman on the Arabian Peninsula, pretty close to off Gujarat, which is hanging under that Junagadh label. To the east, on the Bay of Bengal, the strategically acquired territories of Assam, Manipur, and so forth, brought India around, all the way around Bangladesh to the border of Burma and the Andaman Sea. On both sides, down to the south, the coastline is defined by what we call GATS, G-H-A-T-S. These are mountain ranges that go down like steps from inland to the sea. And because they are hot and cold and coastal at the same time, these are areas of extraordinary biodiversity. The Tropic of Cancer runs across the middle of this whole landmass. Temperate Delhi is on the north, Mumbai is way south, Allahabad and Gujarat and Bhopal are actually almost on the tropic, and Kolkata is just below. The Deccan, which is the well-watered plains around the Arab-oriented Hyderabad, are halfway between the Tropic of Cancer and the equator. And the equator almost touches the tip of the Indian subcontinent and its teardrop, Sri Lanka. And yet it snows in Kashmir and Ladakh. So this is the geography we are talking about. The weirdest part of this geography, if you don't know, is that down in the very south, with its oppressive heat and fierce monsoons, there are these cool mountains, the Ghats, where coffee grows, and exiled Tibetans can live just fine in the cold air. And secondly, the Himalayan hill towns up around Sikkim and Darjeeling, which have the fog and chill of huge heights, are in tropical zones. Tea can grow here for that bizarre reason. Darjeeling has become its eponym because it is so perfect for tea. Leaves grown on the slopes and ridges of the 5-mile-high Kanchenjunga. The Himalayas' third highest peak is right there, and they are literally the top of the tea crop, grown much higher than the same tea in the hills of China and Japan. Camellia sinensis needs sun, but not a whole lot. And at this height, the daily fog and the mist of the mountains and the low-hanging clouds shade it. The tea bush is very thirsty, requiring a minimum of 55 inches of rain a year. And up here, where a bush gets more than twice that, the steep slopes provide natural drainage that keep it from being bogged or swamped. The cold air comes down at night from the 5 snow-capped peaks of Kanchenjunga, and it wicks away any moisture left on the leaves, and it slows down the bud growth, which intensifies the flavor. And so this cold night air, the daily fog, the reliable monsoon, this exceptional intersection of high altitude and semi-tropical latitude produces a brew better than all the tea in China, one that is universally considered the champagne of black tea. But let us remember this: tea is native to China, and it was secretly brought to India by the British under cover of the Opium Wars, which they deliberately started in order to do this, because the British needed plentiful and cheap tea to sustain the workers in its new industrial revolution. So you see that food can cause history and depend on geography, or what the French call terroir. And as you can see, India has it all. This is why its food is so rich and varied and stubbornly traditional. Most importantly, I think this is why, although there have been internal battles and takeovers, India has never needed to invade its neighbors or create a foreign empire like the Greeks and Romans and the English just to have a nice dinner. In this respect, it has been content. The same is true for Egypt and Mexico. If you can feed your people, you have no need to go invade and create an empire. That is often an overlooked part of history. As it happens, all this glorious food available in India was the propeller of Indian culture and remains the center of Indian culture now. The hearth is still the heart of the country. Fire is sacred, and what it touches is blessed. Preparing food is noble. Doing it with care is righteous and rewarding. And this may be why restaurants were very late to open in India compared to China, where they came in the 12th century, Persia and Europe. And they began, and anybody who ever went to India in the 60s, 70s, even the 80s, knew that the only restaurants were inside of hotels for foreigners. There were not a lot of restaurants that you could go to. You had to go to a hotel to eat. Restaurants in India are a relatively, compared to other cultures, and China began in the 12th century, very new, because it was a sacred art and it was practiced in your home. Food informs India's epic literature and its religions. You have all heard of Ayurveda, which is the traditional Indian medical practice that's at least 5,000 years old. It is still India's main form of healthcare. We also have practitioners right here in Portland, so this is very much alive for all of us, and it involves the kitchen. Ayurveda literally means science of life. Like early Greek medicine, which was actually significantly based on this, it aims to equalize our natural energies of wind, fire, and earth as they affect our mind and body. They are known in Sanskrit as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, the primary forces that will shape how we act or think, and therefore we have to feed them properly. So this Hindu science of life posits that there are 3 food categories aligned to these 3 forces. There's tamasic foods that are leftover, stale, overripe. They're spoiled. They are heavy. They are animal-based. They're the sort of food whose digestion will slow you down and make you sleepy. Red meat, cheese, alcohol, fried foods, all the good stuff. White sugar should be avoided because they require way too much energy to be digested, and that will leave the spirit dull, maybe confused. Rajasic foods are hot, spicy, sweet, and salty. They unleash energy that will stimulate, but it can irritate. So you have to have moderation here. Also, if you take these foods at noon and not at night, Rajasic foods, caffeine, chocolate, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, pickles, they can be useful. Bland sattvic foods such as juicy fruits, watery vegetables, and whole grains, think macrobiotic, are so easily digested by the stomach, they don't use up any energy. They give you strength and focus to conquer your mind. These are the ideal foods for spiritual quest. So Ayurveda's modern practitioners are horrified by our American obsession with diets. Low carb, no carb, just juice, strictly protein, whatever. They believe a diet that deliberately excludes foods, certain ones, will destroy the possibility of your body balance. Every individual is unique. Every individual needs their own diet. Makes a lot of work in the Indian kitchen. The Hindu religion per se has so many food prescriptions and proscriptions, especially about clean and unclean food, that are not the same as Muslim halal or Jewish kashrut. All food in its original form in the Indian kitchen is thought to be clean. Preparing it is where the problem comes in, because that's where the food is opened up, it is cut into. And here's where the caste system comes in. A Brahmin cannot eat food touched by a member of a lower caste. These people are considered to be dirty. Ditto people who have committed dirty deeds. Hygienic logic forbids the sale of any animal that died of natural causes. It might be poisonous. About 2,700 years ago in India, a religious text appeared called the Abhidharma, which is still there in use today. It begins with these words: all beings exist on food. The authors then tell you it is crucial to understand how your food works. Without an X-ray machine, an MRI, or a PT scan, 2,700 years ago, the Abhidharma was able to clearly explain the metabolic process that breaks down every ingredient we ingest, how our digestive system rips it apart into various chemicals that then individually act in different ways, moving through your bloodstream, your intestines, your kidneys. If there's too much going one way, you have a dam, not enough going another, you have an outage, too much that is chilling, burning, the body slackens, weakens, and so forth. The new Buddhist religion from that moment accepted this Dharma guidebook as its own, relying on its science to promote vegetarianism as a righteous, healthy lifestyle. At that time, the unrestrained Hindu Brahmins were confiscating the entire continent's cows for their dinner parties, feasting on beef, depriving the peasantry of animals to till their field or provide milk or cooking fuel called dung. And the reason we have this is it's the beginning of the Iron Age. It is the creation of knives and weapons. And they realized they could kill animals, and the Brahmins went nuts, killing every cow in sight and claiming they were sacrificing them, and what they were doing was serving them at big banquets and eating them endlessly. And the peasants were starving to death in droves. By focusing on this monstrous inequality with promises to rectify it, a man now we call the Shakyamuni Buddha was quickly able to spread his new religion through India. He relentlessly emphasized that India's unique drought-resistant zebu cow was worth infinitely more as a plow, a milk bottle, and dung than as steak for some priestly dinners. It deserved to live. And thus the concept of the sacred cow came to pass. It was so popular, the Brahmin Hindus recognized defeat and embraced this Buddhist prohibition as their own, as a Hindu law. It is now actually enshrined in the Indian Constitution. This is why you will not find beef on most Indian kitchen menus. Vengefully accusing pork-phobic Muslims of sacrilegiously killing the sacred cow for their supper, even if they have not done this, is now the ruse that allows Modi and his minions to wage war on India's remaining Muslim population. Muslims are forbidden to eat pork. You don't find much of that on the Indian kitchen or the Indian menu either, but not only for this religious reason. It is because pigs cannot live in hot, steamy climates, and they don't do well on high mountain slopes where herding is impossible. So pigs are not a viable food source in much of the country. Those who aren't strictly vegetarian, dependent on pulses, beans, and dairy, and pulses are what they call lentils, will eat chicken and fish, lamb and goat. And if they are feeding you, a Westerner, they will call that goat mutton, because in the Raj, they learned that Indians recoil at the thought of having to eat this unfamiliar meat, but they do know mutton. Now, let me astonish you with another fact of the Indian kitchen. It may serve you lamb, chicken and fish, but think about how you get it served to you. Do you get those big slabs that we put out? Large portions you have to cut up with a knife that is provided as part of your table service. Do you even find a knife on your table at an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant for that matter? In short, this is because the table is supposed to be a place of peace, and the knife is a weapon that can kill, so it does not belong at a table. We owe the fact that most Asian food, including Indian, is served to us cut up to the Buddhist teaching that a weapon should not be in a place of peace. The do no harm Jains came into existence at the same time as the do no harm Buddhists, with even more to say about eating. There are still about 4 million Jains in India, and they are all eating under these same tight strictures that came down 2,700 years ago. It is, of course, impossible to survive without killing or injuring something, so the Jains strive to avoid doing intentional harm. Thus, they are not supposed to be farmers because tilling the soil would kill the bugs in there, perform jobs involving fermentation, digging, selling weapons or pesticides. They're not allowed to trade in meat products, honey, eggs, silk, or leather. While all observant Jains avoid certain foods that are absolutely forbidden, meat, fish, honey, and eggs, there are variations in what they will otherwise eat. It will depend on your family custom and your personal circumstances, what your kitchen looks like. There is a lot of fish cooked in Indian kitchens, but the climate and the terrain and the unique religions have made India the world's primary and largest vegetarian culture. The plant and dairy-based diet with eggs thrown in started in Indian kitchens and spread across East Asia with its Buddhist monks missionaries. This emphasis on vegetarianism, which, think about it, is a way of saying emphasis on limitations. You have to have limitations in life. Put India in direct contrast to China, whose citizens, it has been said, will eat everything that flies but a kite, and everything with 4 legs but a table. This means that to the Chinese, absolutely nothing is sacred. And you can think about that as they keep pursuing their various foreign policies, go right back to the dinner table. Some people like to say that this ethos called vegetarianism or not harming or understanding you can't have everything just because it's out there is what has made India relatively peaceful vis-a-vis its neighbors in a world where too many others are attacking too many others. So let's look into some regional kitchens and what they cook now that I've given you a bit of the historical overview. I haven't bored you. The most native, distinct, and least fusion cooking in India is in the deep south, home to the darker-skinned Dravidian people who are thought to be the real original inhabitants of this whole subcontinent. They're Tamil and Tugolu and others, and they were already trading with the Roman Empire by 200 BC. South India's star ingredient that was likely traded back then with Rome in 200 BC is, does anybody want to take a guess? A dried local berry that we call black pepper. That peppercorn grows on a vine native to what is called the Malabar coast in southwest India, where it says Goa there, just below that. It is a vine that's really resistant to a lot of transplanting. So to get black pepper has always meant you had to get to India, to this part of India, and the world has done that for millennium just because of this one thing. The black peppercorn has antibiotic properties, but more valuable to our human stomach, the chemicals of this dried berry encourage the production of hydrochloric acid in your stomach, and that is the main component you need to break down your food. In other words, black pepper makes meat easier to digest. Human lust for these black peppercorns made a harbor town in the center of this Malabar coast, Cochin, into a legendarily wealthy spice center, a cosmopolitan enclave of Jews, Chinese, Arabs, and European Christians who all lived in harmony with the local Hindus and Dravidians, and they all cooked their own distinct dishes. There are traceable Chinese influences in the cooking of the Kerala province where the Cochin is, and there is Jewish Indian cooking from people who still call themselves Bene Israel. You can find their cookbooks online. This international enclave of people coming and going from coastal Cochin has left the state of Kerala, if you ever wondered why, more open and progressive than the rest of India. Everybody always remarks about that. And this is the answer. Like Mainers on the coast, we've had people coming and going from everywhere. We're pretty tolerant. We're pretty open. And the same from all the people who lived in Cochin and Kerala on the spice trade. And by the way, just to show you again how food is the root of history, it was the new Spanish crown's greedy wish in 1492 to get to India faster and monopolize the black pepper trade that put Christopher Columbus on the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria looking for a shortcut. And we know he didn't quite get that shortcut, or we wouldn't be here. The curry, K-A-R-I, leaf used in southern Indian cooking the way Europeans and we would use a laurel or a bay leaf also comes from trees that live in this hot, steamy land. These leaves are a key ingredient in a local spice mix called sambar powder, which includes dried lentils. The English pronounce these leaves curry leaves and put their name curry onto anything and anything spicy. Everything spicy in India became curry. In other words, what we call curry and curry powder, and by the way, something no Indian kitchen has is curry powder, comes from the Brits in the Raj, who considered everything with a strongly flavored sauce to be curry. So it is not actually traditional Indian cooking. We call it curry powder, but they have a very different thing, which you probably may have also called garam masala, which is a series of spices blended that they add at the end just before they serve it to you. And it is not yellow with the turmeric of our curry powder. Another spice native to the area is cinnamon, which in its purest uncommercialized form happens to be the bark of a tree that grows in Sri Lanka. And because so if you see on your spice thing that they're offering you cinnamon from Sri Lanka, that is the pure cinnamon, they're not lying. And because spices from islands to the east and eventually chilies from the west were landed here as part of the world trade in this black pepper and the cinnamon bark, the foods of the south in Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu made maximum use of all these spices, and they are India's hottest foods to eat. Meat animals cannot survive in the expressive steamy heat of South India, but there's plenty of fish and a little chicken, which is native to nearby Burma and Malaysia. It is also way too hot for wheat, so there's no bread as you and I know it. Instead, you get papadums, that thin cracker bread made by deep frying dried black lentils. This is so authentic and so uniquely Indian, you are now likely going to be offered it right away when you sit down at any Indian restaurant with chutneys at the start of your American Indian meal as a way of emphasizing the absolute Indianness of this place. Pickling or fermenting vegetables is a way of preserving them without refrigeration, and these are a significant part of the diet here, starting with all those chutneys you get with your papadums. There's also the dosa, a useful dough made from fermenting a mix of the black lentils with rice. Rice is the other mainstay as there is plenty of water to grow it. So kitchens make pancakes called idli from steamed rice flour, and they make uttappams from a batter of rice and lentil flour. As it happens, lentils, which are called pulses here, elsewhere, are the mainstay of the southern kitchen, along with tropical fruits, mangoes, guava, tamarind, coconuts. Coconut is the main source of cooking oil, and bananas whose leaves have been traditionally used as plates. That banana is native to New Guinea and was evidently brought here millenniums ago by some Indian Ocean fishermen who liked it. India is where Alexander the Great first tasted the yellow banana, and was so impressed, somewhere around 327 BC, he sent his troops back to Greece with a ship laden with bananas. There was hardly room for the troops. Another staple of the South is a pulse known as the chickpea. Not so much that tan one that we know as the garbanzo, but a darker, smaller sibling, the desi chickpea. The desi is mostly used ground up into what is known as gram flour or besan. This is chickpea flour. And here our story gets really flavorful. The chickpea, both kinds, is native to Anatolia, the middle of Turkey and Mesopotamia, and was probably one of the earliest domesticated plants. Archaeologists believe it was such a culinary sensation, it was carried by travelers along the Silk Roads and in watercraft. What we call the garbanzo, Indians call Kabuli chana, from the belief, never confirmed, that it came through the Khyber Pass from Kabul in Afghanistan. Whatever its point of entry, today the biggest producer and consumer of the chickpea is India. When we move slightly north and inland, we come to Hyderabad on the river-crossed Deccan Plains and the Nizam city with its Arab influences and what is known as Andhra cooking. The Nizams were Turkic, and they were Hadrami Arab people. Nizam is the Arab word that means order or arrangement of things. They are thought to be descended from the Abid Khan, who was a Persian from Samarkand, whose lineage is traced all the way back to Sufi Shihab-ud-Din Sarwadi in Iran. In the early 1650s, on his way to the Hajj, which is the religious pilgrimage, Abid Khan stopped here, where the young prince Aurangzeb, who was the governor of this province, cultivated him. This immigration of Arabs gives Hyderabad very distinct cooking of rich and elaborate Middle Eastern lamb and chicken dishes. They are often combined with rice, but they are not cooked in the coconut oil of the South, but now in ghee, clarified butter, which is something closer to what the Persians and the Arabs do. And yet it was flavored with tamarind and spices of the South and a lot of black pepper. So while we're flavoring with tamarind, let us remember the great British contribution to gourmet cookery everywhere, Worcestershire sauce. This didn't just pop out nowhere in the heads of two Worcestershire pharmacists, Mr. Lee and Mr. Perrins. Its origins were an Indian kitchen. The flavors the Raj Brits found in Bengal. Tamarind is distinctly not English. It is thought that someone in the Raj developed a taste for an Indian tamarind-laced sauce that got its sharpness from the much maligned odorous resin known as asafoetida or hing. This comes from the mountains of Afghanistan and northern Pakistan. Not having at hand or much liking this hing, but liking this sauce, the Brits reverted to a very old Roman Empire recipe for garum sauce and substituted fermented fish with their tamarind to give you Worcestershire sauce. The end of India's Arabian Sea coastline is the partly peninsular and temperate Gujarat. It is hanging out there. Whose western, looks like a mask, whose western border is with Pakistan. It has long been known for unique vegetarian cooking due to its very fertile land, abundance of fruits, and the large Jain community that live there. Much fish, but very little meat is consumed, and many dishes are sugary sweet. Gujarat and the adjoining lands to the southeast going toward Bombay in the state of Maharashtra are now the center of India's very enormous onion growing region. The uniquely flavorful Indian onion is the most common crucial element in kitchens everywhere on this subcontinent, and this popularity gave it a starring role in modern Indian history. For one thing, its harvests have become vital to the economic well-being of 4 largely populated Indian states, including Gujarat and Maharashtra, whose port, Mumbai, is where they are exported to the Arabian Peninsula. The shortfalls in onions of 1998, 2010, 2015, and 2019 actually provoked political crises. A poor harvest is thought to have brought down the government in 1980 and brought Indira Gandhi to power. Extreme weather in 2019 caused an onion shortage, which caused their price to soar, which begat a major political crisis for Narendra Modi, who was himself from Gujarat. He prohibited the hoarding and the export of onions, and that caused a price panic in Bangladesh, and anger in Nepal, and a huge dent in the Indian economy. Gujarat, the most western state of India, across the straits there from the Arabian Peninsula, is where pakoras are believed to have been created. They are typical tea time food. I mention this because a pakora, if you know, is essentially chickpea flour mixed into a ball with some minced onion, and then it is deep fried. Have you ever heard that before? Taking chickpea flour and deep frying it? What do we call that? Okay, there you go. So the premier snack of the Middle East is the premier snack of Gujarat. Surprise, they're very close together. People travel, they like what they eat, they bring it with them, the takeout, and bingo, you have a whole new product. It is said because their geography puts their backs to India, you could see that really. Gujaratis tend to be outward-looking globetrotters with a large diaspora overseas and all around India. There are many Gujarati farsan snacks and mini meals that are deliberately designed to travel and keep well. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, when the new Muslim regime was launching its jihadist armies, Gujarat became a refuge for Zoroastrians who were fleeing from Persia, which is today's Iran. These refugee worshippers of Zarathustra became known as the Parsi. Their language was Farsi, they became known as the Parsi, whose language after centuries being there in India is still Farsi, the language of Iran, and whose cooking remains a reflection of that Persian heritage, especially on the solstice, March 21st, Nowruz, which is the Persian New Year. They will cook almost the same menu that people in Iran will be cooking. But the Parsis have adopted the local taste for sweetness, and spicy, sour, and sweet is their kitchen's holy trinity. Perfecting a balance is the goal. A quintessential example of their cooking is called dansak, a much-loved lentil and meat dish you can find in a Persian cookbook too, which is the king of all foods Parsi. Per-edu is a term in Parsi that means top it with an egg. Almost any vegetable like okra, potatoes, curry, spinach can be topped with an egg, scrambled egg, basically. It's called a Parsi omelet, and it has often got some chickpea flour in it. A final reflection of their Persian heritage is that they use vermicelli, the tiny noodles. If you see them in rice-a-roni, that's a Persian pilaf. That's where it came from, pasta with rice. And they're the only people in India where you might find some vermicelli in your dinner. They also use them for sweets like the Persians do. When the British came to India, the Parsis, who had been farmers in Gujarat, minding their business, migrated to the growing city of Bombay, where they became very prosperous merchants, such as the Tatas, and they became respected artists, such as the orchestra conductor Zubin Mehta. Partly because of their outsized role in making Bombay an international center of commerce, Parsi cooking is dominant in the Indian restaurants there. It is hard to say whether it was the Parsis or the Mughals who introduced India to one of its most favorite spices, ajwan, also known as karam, C-A-R-O-M. It is a seed native to Persia. It's cultivated in Gujarat and Rajasthan, both on the west side of the country, because it is extremely useful. It has antifungal and antibacterial properties, plus it has active enzymes that improves the flow of your stomach acid and relieve your indigestion, bloating, and gas. It can help with peptic ulcers as well as sores in the esophagus and intestine. If you go to the internet, you will be told ajwain is a superfood. Many Indian kitchens simply roll the seeds into their dough for samosas or roti like that to get it into your stomach. Others boil them in water with honey and drink up. They also chew on them after dinner to eliminate bad breath and promote good oral health. You might see in a real restaurant, they will come after your meal and bring you a little dish of seeds, and ajwan will be in there. Although at the end of the Raj, New Delhi became India's capital, and overshadowed it. Kolkata was historically the cultural, artistic center of the whole subcontinent. In those centuries without cars and planes, its location on plains of the Great Ganges Delta made it very accessible by boat or foot. Kolkata is the center of Bengal, the south central east part of India that once included what is now Bangladesh. A common flavoring in its cooking that spread east to Assam and north to Darjeeling and to this library is Panch Phoron, which literally means 5 spices. It should be called 5 seeds because that's what it is. It's a crushed blend of mustard seed, cumin seed, nigella seed, fennel seed, and fenugreek seed. Note here, food networking. The mustard seed is native, but nigella, which is only used in Bengali kitchens, comes from Eastern Europe and Turkey. Cumin is thought to be native to Egypt and in prehistory naturalized on the Eastern Mediterranean. Today, India is the largest producer. Fenugreek, a significantly medicinal seed, some of you may know it's given to new mothers to increase their milk flow, is also thought to have originated in the Middle East. It was used by Jews in the Temple of Jerusalem and by Egyptians. But now India is the largest producer. Fennel seeds also come from the southern side of the Mediterranean. So you see the effects of the spice trade here, and you can understand why the Arabs were in the middle. But India is so full of spices, they traded the black pepper and the cinnamon bark, and they had access to all of these spices. Mustard oil is the main cooking medium in Bengal, but you will find coconut milk in some of your curries. A Bengali is often typified or called a mashbat Bengali, which means a fish rice eater. Lentils and beans are not really featured as prominently here as they are elsewhere. The Muslim invasion eventually brought Persian Arabic food to Bengal, resulting in luscious biryanis or Indian pilafs that are made with local rice. Yogurt is fashioned into very sweet desserts. But the most distinct feature of a Bengali kitchen, which you may not know, is the idea of separate courses. In much of India, you get everything at once. On a banana leaf in the south, on a copper brass thali platter in the north. In Bengal, as in an American restaurant, you get one course after another. And because we are used to that, we might not notice it. Not too far north of the plains that have created Calcutta, instantly out of nowhere, the Himalayas confront you like a sky-high wall. You don't see rolling hills or foothills, just bam, there they are. And as you wind and climb into what's now called West Bengal, you will get Tibetan food with its Chinese influences of noodles and dumplings, food that doesn't have chilies, but a lot of garlic and ginger. You will get milk tea and butter tea because the only Himalayan pass that has ever been open in the winter for centuries came down from the Tibetan plateau into this area. And Tibetan traders flowed through here on their way to Nepal and India, bringing their butter tea, their milk tea, and their dumplings and noodles with them. You can get English tea here at 4 p.m. with lots of sweets resembling European pastry in tea houses left from the Raj. And for dinner, you can get mounds of plain rice because the plant grows so well in what we call Sikkim. The name Sikkim actually means Valley of Rice. Now we're going to descend and turn westward into the Indian heartland to encounter what is probably the best known, most exported Indian cooking, the ubiquitous food that's come to represent the entire subcontinent. It comes from the opulent camel-filled oases in the great desert of Rajasthan and the crowded streets of Delhi, from the foothills known as the Punjab, and Punjab means 5 rivers, and magical landscape of Kashmir. It is called in kitchens and cookbooks Punjabi or Mughlai food. It's that saag paneer, tandoori chicken, and lamb korma you will find on every Indian menu in our country because that is what we think is Indian food. It is, but is it? Just look at what the cookbooks say. It's Mughlai. Mughlai is Mughal. In the Indian kitchen, Mughlai means food of the Muslims or the Mughals, recognition that their subcontinent was invaded from all sides by Islamic adherents who, like every other immigrant, brought their cooking with them. The Mughal dynasty that ruled much of India from the early 16th century when they really took hold to the 18th century when the British threw them out began with Babur, the all-powerful descendant of Genghis Khan. So the word also carries hints of Mongol. A subsequent Mughal ruler we know as Shah Jahan, builder of India's most famous monument, the Taj Mahal. He was born in Lahore, in what is now Pakistan, and he was the 5th Mughal emperor, reigning from 1628 to 1658. And it was his son who placed the Turkic Arabic nizams on the throne and kitchens of Hyderabad. Islam originated on the Arabian Peninsula, and its eventual armies of jihad moved out in all directions. They got as far west as Sicily and Morocco, and thus eventually into Al-Andalus or Spain. They went easily north into Persia and Afghanistan, and then they flowed through that Khyber Pass into what is now known Pakistan, but was then known on the subcontinent as the Punjab, land of 5 rivers. So those kebabs and kormas in which meat is braised in yogurt and all those dried fruit dishes called Kashmiri came from Persian kitchens and became Punjabi food, aromatic but not fiery, and thus acceptable to British and American palates. That's why we think that's it. Butter chicken, which they're fighting over in New Delhi right now, dal makhani, kidney bean curry, and all those flatbreads, the rota, the naan, that reminiscent of Middle Eastern originals. The saag paneer and the tandoor cooking, in which chicken or lamb is marinated in yogurt before hitting the hot oven. It's all Mughlai cooking that became Punjabi in the Indian kitchen. This is why the most widely popular so-called Indian restaurant, if you ever go in San Francisco, it is always packed by Indians. It is owned and run by Pakistanis. So you cannot, this is where the cooking keeps. The Mughals also brought with them what was called the Persian pula, P-U-L-A, a dish in which meat and perhaps vegetables, even fruits like apricots, are cooked in rice and mixed right into it. In early centuries, necessity dictated a solution like this because there was no such thing as silverware. You had to eat with your hands, and getting the food in rice was a good way to get it to your mouth. So as this dish pula traveled with people takeout, the name morphed from the original pula, to get ready for it, pulao, pilaf, plov, and paella. Its glamorous version, biryani, in which the cooked rice isn't just mixed up, it's layered with meat and vegetables, is what you will find at a premium price restaurant on Indian menus. It is specially linked to the Arab Samarkandisms of Hyderabad. Punjabi cooking took hold early in Rajasthan, which borders Pakistan, and became the food of its Maharajas. But they and their warrior people were not happy converts to Islam. So around the 12th century, they fled the murderous Muslim invaders who were crossing from Pakistan into their homeland. The Rajputs, as they were called, escaped as far east across India as they could, and eventually found safety above the plains in the Himalayan mountain valleys. One of these was the Happy Valley of the Newari people, original inhabitants of what we now call Nepal. The invaders' observation that these natives lived in wooden houses and had erected a great wooden pavilion temple in the center of town made them call this ancient valley Kathmandu, place of wooden structures. Of course, they brought their Punjabi food with them. It was distinct from local Newari cooking, which is very scientific, medically reasoned, and based on all the local greens the Newaris pioneered and in the 6th century gifted the Chinese emperor. Newari dishes are still intact in many Kathmandu kitchens. And I think I'm going to help a young man open a Newari restaurant in South Portland. But over the centuries, as the Rajputs became the dominant people of this Happy Valley and the country, Hindus with a caste system, a warrior mentality, and their own cooking style, they came to define the kitchen. It is why a Nepali menu is very hard to differentiate from a Punjabi or a Mughlai one. This especially explains the kitchens up in Darjeeling and brings us to a footnote of history. To create those tea plantations in this territory, newly wrested from Bhutan in the mid-19th century, the British imported a sturdy warrior mountain people of Tibetan and Rajput ancestry, people who could whack the machetes known as kukris and terrace steep slopes into gardens. They came from a nearby kingdom, then known as Gorkha, which is the hilly part of what became Nepal. Of course, they brought their food with them. They populated Darjeeling and continued to create and tend its tea plantations even to this day, which is why, even though Darjeeling is part of West Bengal and India, the lingua franca is Nepali. When the Brits brought these valiant warriors with them into World War II to fight for the Allies, because Brits can't speak English, they called them the Gurkhas. And these Gurkhas, the Gorkha people, who after the war retired to England, brought their food with them, and are thought to be the people who popularized Indian food. As you know, the Brits are nuts for Indian food. Today, the Brits are gone from Darjeeling, which is now part of West Bengal, but the Nepalis remain, and the menus of Darjeeling are theirs, but the tourists will swear to you it's Indian food. In fact, the aloo dum, or potato recipe in this library, has been distributing in conjunction with the Panch Puran, is Nepali, but it is traditionally made with that unique Bengali Indian spice Panch Puran. So you can't really separate it all out. This conflation of cultures is why the three most popular Indian restaurants in southern Maine, Tandoor, High Bombay, and Sher Punjab in Brunswick, which has just brought us food, are all owned and operated not by Indians, but by Nepalis. The India Palace in Portland is owned and run by Bangladeshis. The Taj in South Portland is owned and operated by a family from India's South, which, as I explained, has its distinct cooking, but their menu is full of the traditional Punjabi food that they think you think is Indian. And that's how it works. And so finally, a very quick word about Indian cooking. In America, after Julia Child crashed through with mastering the art of French cooking and everybody went crazy, the New York City publisher started to look for people to put out other cookbooks. And we had Marcela Hazan teaching us Italian and Penelope Casas teaching us Spanish. And when Paula Wolford broke through with her book about Morocco, they went out and had to find somebody to put Indian cooking books in our kitchens. And they came up with somebody the BBC had discovered, the very glamorous Indian movie star Madhur Jaffrey. And Madhur Jaffrey became for us the Julia Child of Indian cooking. She was on TV. She opened the first white cloth restaurant, white tablecloth Indian upscale restaurant in Manhattan on the East Side. And she wrote many cookbooks, including the one where I showed you she tried to trace the curry trail. I brought some of her books if you want to look at them. And if you want to look at the article about the fight over butter chicken, please feel free. If you have any questions, I'll try to take them and turn it over to other people so you can eat.